The dynamic duo known as the Holy Brothers, Marvin Etzioni and OG Discograffiti Soldier of Sound Willie Aaron, have a new album out called High in My Balloon. This remarkable album is the triumphant result of the two friends turning to music for comfort and strength after Marvin's bout with leukemia and Willie was forced to deal with the loss of his wife of 25 years to cancer. Americana Highways described it as like Brian Wilson snuck into the studio, fired up the machines, and did some work on some of the tracks not locked up. Really, the harmonies, basic tracks, songwriting, and lots of other odds and ends are that momentous. If you love the harmonies and sonic experimentation of Bookends era Simon & Garfunkel, the Beach Boys, and Beck's Circus Sea Change, you owe it to yourself to dig into the musical wonders of High in My Balloon by the Holy Brothers, available right now on Regional Records. The second single from Future Prophet Records is here. Birthday Girl presents Never the Sound, available right now on Future Prophet Records. That's Future, Prophet, records.com. Order now. So provisionally known as The Third Coming of Love, one would think that the origin story behind the LP's iconic title would have a deep, profound story behind it, and one would be wrong. Around that time, Arthur broke up with a woman, and her response was, "But you told me you'd love me forever." And his reply to that was, "Yeah, well, forever changes." So the full title is really Love Forever Changes.
Great title.
Great title, yeah.
Knowing where it came from, it's one of those things where it's a turn of phrase that kind of accidentally relates to the material in a way that has a different meaning than that story. It's a very autumnal kind of record. It's a very like falling leaves kind of record to me.
Yeah.
About time passing and about losing something.
And also very literally, it's about his feelings toward his own band.
Right.
Welcome to Discograffiti, the deep dive podcast for music obsessives that gives maniacs like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebroe, and when I was a kid, I thought I loved music. But no, that was only the beginning. I almost lost my life, and in the process, it made music a top priority in a way I'd thought was completely unimaginable. I quit my job, went all in on Discograffiti, and never looked back. And so, with 3 new episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about, or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Love! Psst, along with our special guest, Joe Kennedy. This episode is part of a series called 7 and 7 and 7 is, the definitive 21-episode story of Arthur Lee and Love, which I've consciously crafted to act as the ultimate repository of fact and opinion on one of the greatest bands to ever walk the face of the earth, the almighty Love. It includes 13 episodes heralding the return of Discograffiti host OG Joe Kennedy, 6 episodes from a 4.5-hour interview with OG Love mainstay Johnny Echols, and 2 episodes from a 2.5-hour interview with the members of Baby Lemonade, who've served as Love now for coming up on 35 years. This is part 7, covering Love's third record, the undisputed masterpiece Forever Changes, which only a fool would argue is not the towering peak of their career. Here then is the record's background story and the making of it. It's often referred to as the greatest album of all time, especially in the UK, where in 2002 members of Parliament signed a motion declaring Love's 1967 release the greatest album of all time. Here are just a few of the many things that Joe discusses with Discograffiti in this podcast. How drugs factored into things during that time and which drugs they were, what separated the orchestrations intended for this record from the strings on all other rock records up to this point, the misunderstood notions about who's playing what and the band members' involvement in the process of creating the songs, whether or not Forever Changes was intended at the outset to be a double album, just how things got off on the wrong foot on the first day of sessions, the extent of the Wrecking Crew's involvement in playing on the record, why exactly they turned down Monterey Pop, the man who's responsible for sequencing the album, as well as the one song that was cut from the track list, and the background story which begat its classic title. Coming up, we've got an incredible deep dive series on Jefferson Airplane with special guests Jack Cassidy, China Cantner, and David Freiberg, a Quicksilver Messenger Service series with Lenny Kaye and David Freiberg again, and a hell of a lot more. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then! Last we checked in with Arthur Lee and company, they had basically just found their musical voice and were hung up on the Doors' success with Elektra and really were kind of forging into a kind of unknown future after the Sunset Strip had shut down and Stephen Stills had found his voice, turning Sunset Strip complaints into anti-war sounding anthems.
Yes,
right?
Yes. So crazy time in the music scene, really fertile, amazing time. Also kind of the end of Los Angeles being the center of things, right? When this period is ending, things kind of move up to the Bay Area. You know, it becomes the center of the culture in a way. Forever Changes kind of at this time in '67, it's kind of we're reaching the end of an era in Los Angeles, it feels like.
Yeah, and this really was, in a lot of ways, the capper. And also, in a lot of ways, this has nothing to do with the scene. Just like Bob Dylan, who a lot of people think of just as a knee-jerk thing, as the voice of the 60s. But when you really look at him, especially lyrically, it was the opposite of Peace and Love. A lot of his best and most well-known material is snide put-downs. Just like Forever Changes, there's a darkness coming around.
Yeah, I had thought, it's interesting thinking about Forever Changes, which is a record I think probably most people who are listening to the show are very familiar with and probably have a lot of a working knowledge and feelings about it going into it. To me, it sort of has, it feels like the work of a cynic, right? Arthur's a little bit of a cynic, and a cynic is basically, there's that saying, a cynic is just a disappointed romantic, right?
Right.
So it has a feeling of disillusion to it. That I think it also ties back to where the culture is in 1967 with Vietnam, and there's promise, but I think Arthur's a little bit ahead of the curve in seeing the pitfalls that stand in the way to that promise.
Well, there's also a quote from Arthur that I believe really, we're going to stay on this album for quite some time. We have at least 3 episodes, this one and 2 others that are going to cover this record because there is a lot to talk about. This episode is going to be just Forever Changes in general as an overall picture before we go song for song. But the most important thing to know about Arthur Lee's thought process going into this entire era is what he says here, which is, the words on Forever Changes represented the last words I would say about this planet. At the time I wrote those songs, I thought this might be the last album I'd ever make. The album was made after I thought there was no hope left in the world. I thought I was going to die.
Right, so that sums up that cynicism.
Not even he had a feeling, for whatever reason, it's not like he had a cancer diagnosis, but he literally thought this was it, and then he was going to be passing away. I don't think anyone really dug in and found out exactly what he meant by that, but he really did think that he was going to be passing away after he made this. So besides society going completely mad by early to mid 1967, which is around the time when Arthur wrote the songs that appeared on Forever Changes, the band also had its fair share of internal skirmishes that had upset the already delicate balance that was by now barely maintaining love. At this point, after they had made Da Capo, things are kind of tenuous. First was the same old story, each of the band having his own clique and the dividing faction splintering the unit apart. But making a bad situation worse was the presence of harder drugs on the scene by this point.
So the guys in the band are no strangers to drugs, right? They're no strangers to cannabis and psychedelics. Those substances were so de rigueur by this point that it was even weirder if you didn't do them. But the harder drugs, the powders, hadn't made their way into the scene yet with the kind of ubiquity that would soon see them normalized. The rest of the West Coast spent the summer of love, skipping through the fields of daisies and doing the peace and love bit, or at least that's kind of how history remembers it. But the members of Love were not doing that. They kind of went into a darker place in 67 with cocaine and heroin gradually becoming the drug of choice.
Their guide into that whole scene was Donnie Conca. And as Johnny Echols says, Don Conca had done heroin. We knew it wasn't good. And Arthur said, a lot of us took drugs. Who put the wine here to drink and the grapes that made the wine? Who put the weed here to smoke? God did. That's who. I guess that's a roundabout way of saying we love drugs.
Sound logic.
For Arthur, it probably didn't seem like a contrarian notion to go against the reigning trend in pop and the world at large when he opted to take a parallel leap into the darkness with his lyrics. His words, as he saw them at least, were honest to a fault. And when the man took a look around, he wasn't just seeing the flowers and rainbows that everyone else was. He was seeing end times. And so musically, the stylistic progression from folk rock to jazz rock and then onward to orchestral rock seemed organic. From the go, the album was conceived with orchestration in mind.
All right, so Johnny Echols says, Arthur had already talked about integrating orchestration on the album. It was not a last-minute decision or an afterthought. We went into the studio knowing we would use strings and horns. We were all recording with that in mind and integrating the orchestration into the songs rather than as an added afterthought. It was intended as part of a cohesive whole. So they kind of have a sound that's a bedrock sound of the record, which is like bass, drums, acoustic guitar is kind of the main rhythm section, and then strings and horns. That's kind of the default palette of Forever Changes. So not a ton of electric guitar. There's some leads, but they're not doing the jangle garage thing that they had been doing up to this point. It's a very much like acoustic based, most of the songs, that's the kind of the core of the song is just, a couple acoustic guitars, bass, drums.
Yeah. And, Love don't always just move in a straight line. I mean, as early as the 7 and 7 Is sessions the previous June, Arthur and the gang had been experimenting with a softer approach. Most notably, the acoustic guitars on the Hummingbirds demo, really did portend this record. And it's surprising, actually, whose idea that was. All right, that about does it. To hear the full episode, just visit patreon.com/discograffiti and either subscribe as a private or higher, or just purchase it as a one-off. If you are a fan of the show, please do one of those two to help ensure Discograffiti's continued existence. For over 4 years now, Discograffiti's Friday episodes have been completely free, and it's been my pleasure. But for a variety of reasons, Discograffiti's now moved to the subscription-based Patreon as our primary platform. Moving forward, our public stream will feature a teaser of the Friday episode and a Tuesday teaser of the bonus episode, and that's all. But here's the good news. Only $5 a month will get you the weekly Friday podcast to which you become accustomed. That's it. It's a no-brainer at just $1 an episode. And just that little bit will be what's required to help the show survive. To sweeten the pot, you'll also get regular installments of the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. That's Rudy Fishman's podcast within a podcast featuring our Patreon members as guests. You'll also get access to over 100 back episodes of that show. The $10 Lieutenant tier gets you all that, plus access to half of the Patreon archive. That's hundreds of additional episodes, plus copies of my personal show notes, which include invaluable research, star ratings, and reviews. But the $20 major tier is the place to be, unless you can support the show on even higher tiers, which, if you can afford it, offers substantial perks, including advertising on the show and selecting the guests and artists I cover. With the major tier and above, you get it all. The Monday bonus episodes, aka the best stuff, the Friday show, the Soldiers of Sound podcast, plus access to the entire archive. That's many hundreds of Patreon episodes, an absolutely endless barrage of music entertainment, including 50 episodes of The Private Press with Paul Major, Rock Cousteau, Queasy Listening, and so much more. So support the podcast that's been supporting you for years. Discograffiti's calling, and it needs you, so don't risk feeling guilty by not giving. But enough of me yapping. Go on, subscribe now. Visit patreon.com/discograffiti and find the tier that's right for you. Stay tuned, because next week brings upon us a track-by-track deep dive on what the Brits consider the greatest album in the history of rock and roll. It's everything you've ever wanted to know about every song on Forever Changes. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then, come Monday, the major tier gets a very special treat. Monday's bonus episode is part 8 of our 7 and 7 and 7 is Love series. It's the Johnny Echols interview about Love's masterpiece, Forever Changes. There will be a very short sneak peek running publicly for free on Tuesday morning, but the entirety of the show will only be accessible on the major tier of our Patreon. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful son Mason, Joe Kennedy, Willie Aaron, Johnny Echols, Mike Randall, Rusty Squeezebox, David Green, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, my mom, my dad, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, and access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into the amniotically dark and cozy psychedelic underworld of the 60s and 70s is to leap headfirst into our Spirit series. That's episodes 241 to 249, the Lenny Waronker interview, that's 244 and 245, our ongoing Graham Nash interview in which he talks about everything he's ever done, our 13-episode Moby Grape series featuring interviews with Peter Lewis, Don Stevenson, and Bob Mosley, that's episodes 208 to 214, The Beatles' Pete Best, that's episode 188, our free design interview with all the Dedrick siblings, that's 160 to 162, our Mamas and Papas series featuring my 16-hour Michelle Phillips interview, which she says is the best interview she's ever done. That's episodes 141 to 159. My 13-hour interview with Terry Kirkman and Jules Alexander about everything the association ever did. That's 109 to 113. My interview with Vashti Bunyan about her life and everything she's ever recorded, that's 103 to 104. My interview with Os Mutantes Sergio Diaz, that's 86 and 87. Lou Barlow on the Zombies, that's 59 and 60. Foxygen's Jonathan Rado on Todd Rundgren, that's 37 and 40. Anthony Fantano on the Velvet Underground, that's 32 and 33. Bob Forrest on the band, that's 25 and 27. Andrew Sandoval on the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. Don Randy on David Axelrod, that's episode 17. And Pink Floyd is 1 and 2. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, April 17th, we're coming at you with a sweet, sweet deep dive on every single song off Love's Forever Changes. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!